Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonders, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew many after him both of the Jews and the Gentiles. He was the Christ. When Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day.
Notes on the Christian Josephus. This is the one that certain Christians prize for its relationship in affirming Christian gospel creed and narratives. However, the early Christian theologian Origen contradicts this account from the documents he had seen. Origen does not appear to have seen this version. You will also recall this Christianized Josephus testimony mirrors Paul the Apostle's statement of what the Jews and Greeks in general demand: wonders and wisdom. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, "For Jews demand miraculous signs and Greeks ask for wisdom." This testimony provides this to the general target audience. Ironically, for the Christian Josephus testimony, Paul follows the demands he states from the Jews and Greeks with this statement: "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles." Also in Matthean sayings, there is a strain of tradition preserved where no signs are given but the sign of Jonah only. This testimony also reflects the Gospel's understanding of the target audience. The Gospels are full of miracles and wisdom. The Gospels also do have sayings of Jesus that have the apocalyptic preserved. Herod Antipas demands to see Jesus perform miracles in Luke, and Pilate in John engages Jesus in asking a philosophical wisdom question. What is truth?
Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of wonders. He drew many after him. When Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, and the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day.
Notes on the scholarly edit of Josephus. James Tabor comments on the popular Christian testimony and why the edit is justified. The testimony to Jesus is more problematic since it has been so heavily interpolated by medieval Christian copyists. However, we are more than fortunate that these pious scribes had such heavy hands, since their additions appear to be so blatant and obvious in both placement and phrasing. Scholars have worked on this text quite extensively, and I recommend the summary discussion by John Meyer, a marginal Jew, rethinking the historical Jesus.
I want to start with a text that has nothing to do with John, but I want to play a little exercise with you. This is Josephus's famous testimony to Jesus, and I put in red, all caps, the words that are generally considered to be an interpolation. Now, you have hyper-skeptics like the so-called Jesus mythers, and by the way, Bart Ehrman's book is pretty good on this mythological idea, which Tina and I certainly believe Jesus existed and a lot more than that. But you have people who say, well, this is just a complete Christian interpolation. And if I put here John Meyer's book, A Marginal Jew, he has a wonderful discussion of this. Look at that. It's like 10 or 11 pages. This testimony of Josephus. I do this with my students every year, and you know what I do? I take out the red and the caps, and I tell them, read this text from Josephus. I give them my own translation, and I say, strike out the phrases that you think might have been added for theological reasons. In other words, strip it down to history. What do you think? Because we read Jewish War, believe it or not, in my New Testament class, we actually read the Jewish War. Obviously, we can't absorb it all, but I have the students buy the little paperback because I want them to read something from the period. Take a look at this. Now, at this time, Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, would you go with that? We need a little ding. If you think it's fake, you go ding. A teacher of such men has received the truth with pleasure. Ding. He drew many after him, both of the Jews and the Gentiles. He was the Christ. I don't think so. When Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him. Look at this. For he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold. These, and then 10, that should be 10, that's a typo, 10,000 of other wonderful things about him. Sorry, I was going to correct it, but forget it. And the tribe of Christians so named after him are not extinct at this day. So that's pretty easy, isn't it? I mean, if you strip it down, you get something like this Arabic version. Christian interpolators, as Bart Ehrman has reminded us, they're two things. They're dumb and they're very passionate. Like, they'll put, he's the Christ, he died on a cross in an ancient text that's supposed to be written in the 1st century BC. You know, they're just not that acute historically. They're not like modern forgers that can really fool experts. They're just, I hate to use the word dumb, but, you know, they're not up to our historical standards. So here, Shlomo, he found an Arabic version that is not touched by the Christians. And look, it's just like the version we just created.
At this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. And those who had become his disciples did not abandon their loyalty to him. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, they believed that he was the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders.
Notes on the Arabic Josephus source. You will see that it is good conduct and virtue highlighted, not miracles. Much support among the Jews, a man and a Messiah. Also note the statement, Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die without the added alliance of the principal Jewish leaders. The source is called Kitab al-Unwan, written by Agapius of Manbij, who lived in northern Syria. It is published by Shlomo Pines, an Arabic version of the Testimonium Flavianum and its implications. Scholar James Tabor commented, "Some years ago Professor Shlomo Pines found a different version of this passage in an Arabic version of Josephus dating to the 10th century CE. It has obviously not been interpolated in the same way as the Christian version circulating in the West, and it reads remarkably close to our non-interpolated. Notice that loyalty is the chief quality given to his followers, many Jewish, something the Gospel of Mark that is the main bone structure of our Gospel narratives, influenced possibly by Pauline theology over the James Jerusalem Jewish group. The Gospel of Mark narrative sought to undermine the loyalty of the Jewish followers and the family of Jesus and highlight Gentile believers for the audience.
The Slavonic Josephus. Extra material. At that time there appeared a man, and many of the people followed and listened to his teachings. And many souls were aroused, thinking that by him the Jewish tribes would free themselves from the hands of the Romans. They bade him enter the city, kill the Roman troops and Pilate, and reign over these. When news of this came to the Jewish leaders, they assembled to the chief priests and said, "We are powerless and too weak to oppose the Romans. Let us go and inform Pilate what we have heard, and we shall be free of anxiety. If at some time Pilate shall hear this from others, we shall be deprived of our property, ourselves slaughtered, and our children exiled." And they went and informed Pilate.
Notes on the Slavonic Josephus. The Slavonic Josephus dates vary, possibly as early as the 9th or as late as the 14th century. There are some who think the Slavonic was not the original translation of the source, a rolling text with interpolations, but perhaps with original content of Josephus that was not preserved by Christian scribes. Perhaps this later Slavonic translation preserved some material from a much earlier translation from Greek or Aramaic that did not survive. The false pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. Jeremiah. What the two passages of Origen do show is that whatever Origen read in his Josephus edition cannot have been the extant text of that famous passage with its orthodox Christian wording, but quite a different text hostile to Jesus and the Christians, and really in the Emperor Vespasian, that the expectations of the Jews found their fulfillment. This amounts to saying that there is no proof of the existence of the famous testimony before the time when Christianity as a state religion was able to suppress all writings hostile to its founder or its teachings, a power officially conferred upon it by an edict of Constantine and reenacted by the emperors Theodosius and Valentinian after the brief pagan revival under Julian. Naturally, a party possessing the power to destroy obnoxious books will ipso facto be in a position to enforce minor omissions and alterations in works in which only individual passages were felt to be objectionable. It is equally clear that owners of valuable manuscripts, whether private individuals, book vendors, or officials in libraries and synagogues, should have preferred the excision of a few lines or certain alterations to the alternative of seeing their treasures devoured by the flames. Add to this the loss involved in the destruction of a whole Josephus in manuscript and the laws imposing capital punishment on the concealed possession of writings hostile to Christianity, and the natural consequence will be obvious to everyone. As a matter of fact, not a single Greek, Latin, Slavonic, or other Josephus text has come down to us which has not passed through the hands of Christian scribes and Christian owners. The numerous glosses and marginal notes abounding in every single manuscript fully bear out this statement. What should be stressed here is the Portuguese Jewish physician and philosopher Abraham Zacuto Lusitano argument that the Testimonium interrupts the logical sequence of the text and must therefore be considered an interpolation. The same, Rabbi, the other tumult pointeth to the first. The matter calls for some elucidation. In the portion of the text containing inter alia, the Testimonium, there is a mention of two calamities. Having finished with the first, Josephus adds these words, and so the riot, stasis, ceased. The second, described in chapter 5, he connects with the first, saying, and about the same time another calamity disturbed the Jews, etc.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something of that in there. I mean, I think to talk about any kind of kingdom that's not Rome was a threat. So, to talk about the kingdom of God, it all sounds very kind of, easygoing and religious to us today. But the kingdom of God to Roman ears in the first century would have been some kind of threat because, obviously the king is Caesar. So, what is this guy talking about? I do think this idea, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, isn't necessarily borne out by the Gospels. He's well able to defeat his opponents verbally. He's always having these sort of arguments with them. Like you say, we have the incident in the temple. There's references to swords in the Gethsemane scene. So I don't think Jesus is entirely kind of pacifistic. I think he's preaching this kingdom of God that is coming, and it's not coming through taking up arms and taking on Rome, but it doesn't mean that people have to be entirely passive. They still have to be kind of preparing themselves and getting things ready for it. One of the things that I always wish we had is the full version of whatever it was that Josephus said about Jesus. And I've already mentioned that most people think that that's been edited by Christian scribes. And clearly some things have been added, like Josephus wouldn't say he was the Messiah. That seems very odd. But the passage comes in the midst of a series of tumults at the time of Pontius Pilate. And so I think it's very likely that there was something in there that's been taken out by Christians because they didn't like it much, some kind of tumult. And I mean, the likeliest thing from what we know is that it was Josephus's account of the incident in the temple. And I would love to know what Josephus made of that. Clearly, it's in amongst other tumults, so he's describing it as something of a kind of an uprising or some kind of rebellious activity. Of course, it might not be that one. It might be another account of something else. But again, that also would be really interesting to know what he has to say.
Jesus's ministry, as we call it now, no matter how we construe it, no matter what kind of theological articulation would give it, was at least historically on a collision course with Roman hegemony in the region.